He once owned a culinary empire and lost himself in the process, until the edge of a scorched apple pie and a line written by hand called him back. No one knew who she was, but the scent of cinnamon from the pie she left behind stirred something in the whole city. There are memories that need no name, just the right taste once to remind us who we are, and sometimes the thing that changes everything is tucked inside a basket someone forgot. Evening settled over Vermont, like an old man making his way down a familiar lane, slow, deliberate, and full of memory. Late autumn in this part of the world didn't blaze with color. It whispered instead, with leaves the hue of burnt amber, drifting down onto wooden rooftops, catching briefly on the coats of those passing by. Daniel Hayes stood outside the town's farmer's market, his eyes dulled of curiosity. He wasn't new here. Years ago, as a culinary student, he'd come each fall for internships. But now, everything felt different. He was 34, a young millionaire, once the CEO of one of New York's most celebrated restaurant chains. They'd called him the master of taste reinvention. His face had graced magazines, his handshake inked million-dollar deals. The interviews all shared the same look, sharp-eyed, clipped, and relentlessly focused. But today, those eyes lingered on an old wooden sign scrawled by hand. Vermont Farmers Market, Sundays. Every stall holds a memory. He stepped in, not out of curiosity, but because he had nowhere else to go. Like someone returning to a place from their past, simply because they didn't know where else to begin. The first stall was apples, round, red, misted with dew. He picked one up, not quite seeing, but knowing by touch it was a Granny Smith. The taste memory returned. A tiny kitchen, the snap and hiss of an oven, a curly-haired assistant laughing after burning their first batch of pies. He moved on, past handmade bread, wild honey, strawberry preserves. Each stall looked like a dream carefully tucked into a corner of someone's heart. Daniel could feel the love in every item, but he couldn't seem to reach it until he saw the basket. It was tucked at the edge of the produce table, woven, a wicker unpainted, unvarnished, its rim frayed with time, maybe forgotten, maybe just left behind. He meant to take the plastic one beside it, but his hands reached out instead, lifting the old basket. There was something about its worn simplicity that wouldn't let him walk away. He bent to place some carrots and a bundle of kale inside. When he saw it, a folded note at the bottom, creased and slightly yellowed. No name, no branding. He opened it. The handwriting leaned softly, inked in gentle strokes, as if the person had written more with feeling than precision. Apple, pie, the taste of home. For those who've forgotten what their home once tasted like. The recipe followed. It called for a blend of 3 types of apples, not the prettiest ones, but those tart enough to calm, sweet enough to remember. The spices were humble: cinnamon, nutmeg, a touch of honey, an egg yolk, but it was the last line, smaller than the rest, that held him still. Don't be afraid to season with feeling. It might go wrong the first time, but the third pie is always the best. Daniel stood frozen. In that moment, all the million-dollar contracts, the pitch decks, the market forecasts became a foreign tongue. The only thing that felt close was that quiet, intimate line. He didn't know what made him buy the basket or gather the ingredients listed. He returned to the wooden cabin his family had rented on the edge of town, the one he thought he'd never need again, because his life had belonged elsewhere. The kitchen still smelled of damp wood. He turned on the oven, rinsed the apples, peeled them. His movements lacked the precision of New York's polished kitchens. Everything was slower, softer, like learning again for the first time. The first pie burned at the edges. The crust was dry, the flavor dull, the second too wet. The apples over-softened, the third he changed things a little. A bit more honey, lower heat, longer bake. And when it was done, he didn't try it right away. He sat down, watching it cool in silence. No one was there to critique it. No scores. No influencers live streaming their reactions. Just him in a quiet kitchen, as still as late autumn air. He took a bite. The crust cracked softly, not too crisp, not too limp. The filling gently spiced with the lightest thread of cinnamon and something else, something unnamed. Not delicious, exactly, just familiar. Suddenly, he remembered the way. His mother's pies used to smell, not perfect, but always waiting on the table when he came home. He remembered college nights baking with his freshman roommate, flour on the counter, laughter in the air, and he remembered himself. The version of Daniel who didn't calculate every move, who didn't weigh life in returns, who baked simply because he loved it. As night deepened, he stayed there, half-eaten pie beside him, the note unfolded, the inked words whispering across time. The third pie is always the best, and for the first time in a long, long while, he didn't feel empty, not perfect, but enough to want to try again. The kitchen in the little wooden house tucked deep in the Vermont woods had nothing remarkable about it. An old gas stove, a few pans swaying from iron hooks, and a small window overlooking a garden scattered with wild daisies. Yet that night, it became a stage for something Daniel hadn't expected, an unannounced homecoming. He opened each cabinet. Though he was only renting the place for a few days, it was surprisingly well stocked. Thankfully, Vermont was still a place where people loved the quiet beauty of cooking, not flashy appliances, just practical tools, likely kept by the owner for years. A gray glazed ceramic mixing bowl sat beneath the counter, silent, as if waiting. Daniel set the basket down on the table. The recipe note was still there, slightly curled, a bit smudged with vegetable dust. He smoothed it flat and placed a small stone to hold it in place. Then he began peeling apples. He chose 3 varieties, just like the note suggested. Honey Crisp for soft sweetness, Granny Smith for a hint of tartness, and a red one he couldn't name. Its skin rough and its flesh crisp. The sound of the knife tapping rhythmically against the board felt old. Not worn out, but familiar, in a way that had been distant for too long. Like the way he used to stand behind the kitchen counter in sophomore year, baking pies with his friend Mika. Both of them laughing hard after burning the crust, still eating every crumb anyway. Honey, cinnamon, nutmeg. The scent of cinnamon rose as soon as he folded it into the apple mixture. It wasn't sharp, not piercing, just gentle, like an unexpected hug from behind. Daniel paused. A thin plume of steam drifted from a pot on the stove, fogging the small window. The smell of cinnamon curled through the air. In that moment, the world held still. He closed his eyes and remembered. He didn't know why, but his mind wandered back to a fall afternoon in 2007. His mother, her hair already graying, stood beside a tiny oven in their suburban kitchen. She wasn't a great cook, but whenever guests came, she made that apple pie. Not because it was delicious, but because the cinnamon made the house feel warm. Then came another image, a small apartment in Brooklyn, where he once lived with an old girlfriend. One Christmas Eve, he'd baked a pie to impress her. It came out burnt. She laughed and said, "This proves you're someone who really tries." The kitchen now felt dense with memory, though none of it overwhelmed. It filtered in slowly, quietly, like a scent carried on the wind. He baked the first pie. The clock read 10 p.m. when it came out. The crust had burned slightly. The filling wasn't quite set. Daniel tasted it, nodded. Not bad, but not right. The second attempt was better, but still missing something he couldn't name. Maybe sweetness and maybe soul. He stepped back, sank into a wooden chair, and watched the third pie rise in the oven. Night passed slowly. The kitchen was bathed in soft golden light from a single bulb. No loud voices, no calendars chiming, no urgent emails. Just him and an apple pie, growing in the silence. Finally, the pie came out. This time, he didn't rush. He let it cool, poured a cup of tea, set the plate down gently, and sat. The crust was thin and lightly crisp, the filling warm, fragrant. Not too strong, but every bite left a trace of softness, of heat. It didn't taste perfect, not the perfection of a restaurant kitchen, but there was something deeply human about it. Daniel chewed slowly. Every time he closed his eyes, another memory flickered. As a boy, he once dreamed of becoming a chef, just to make his mother smile. But then life grew crowded. Everything became a project, a target, a spreadsheet. He had spent so much time building something, he forgot why he ever began. Now, in a small kitchen guided by a handwritten recipe and a simple pie, he remembered, not as a CEO, not as the young millionaire in magazine spreads, but as Daniel Hayes, the boy who once felt something stir because of a hand-lettered note, who burned the first pie but tried again, simply because he wanted to feel something true. And that pie didn't just taste of cinnamon and honey, it tasted of memory, gently rewarmed by sincerity. Morning in Vermont clung to the trees like breath held overnight, leaving behind a thin veil of frost, like the dusting of sugar on last night's pie. Daniel woke early, not to the chime of an alarm, not to the pull of a packed schedule, but to something quiet stirring inside him. The feeling left by the third pie still lingered, unresolved, like a musical note left hanging, and it wouldn't let him look away. He stepped out of the cabin, pulling on the rough wool sweater he once swore he'd never wear. His shoes were dusted with soil now, and his hands, more used to ink and signatures than flour and spice, reached instinctively for the small note that had somehow shifted something in him. He kept it folded carefully, tucked in the breast, pocket of his sweater like a forgotten love letter. No name and no address, nothing but a few gentle lines. Don't be afraid to season with feeling. The words wouldn't let him go. Daniel returned to the market, which yesterday had seemed like coincidence and today felt more like a promise or a question still waiting for its answer. He began at the place where the basket had been. The woman running the produce stall, sun-browned and in her 50s, shook her head. That basket. People leave old ones all the time. Who wrote that? I wouldn't know. He moved. On to the bread vendor. A man with flour on his apron chuckled when Daniel showed him the note. Pretty writing. Not mine, though. If I wrote it, you'd think a chicken had danced across the page. The honey stall was quiet. An elderly couple behind the table smiled kindly but could only shrug. A younger woman at the dried flower stand raised an eyebrow, curious. No signature. No. Then maybe they didn't want to be found. He paused. Something stung behind his eyes, not from rejection but from realizing someone had left behind something so beautiful and hadn't asked to be thanked. In his world, where every idea was trademarked, every contribution logged and calculated, this was almost incomprehensible. He wandered to the far end of the market, where there were fewer people. A modest corner with a scattering of jam, jars and small parcels of cookies wrapped in brown paper and tied with twine. This stall didn't look like it was selling anything, more like someone had set it up because they couldn't keep it to themselves. No one stood behind it. Was about to walk away when a voice soft as wind through branches came from behind, looking for someone. He turned. An elderly woman, hair silver and neat, wearing a lamb's wool cardigan that was worn but clean. Her eyes were bright, her nose fine and straight, her face mapped with the lines of someone who had laughed a lot in her life. Daniel hesitated for just a moment, then held out the note. No long explanation, no justifying why he had it. She looked at it without speaking. Then, rather than answer, she asked, "How was the pie?" Daniel smiled, softer than he expected. "The first one burned, the second was missing something, and the third wing still not perfect, but I don't think I've ever enjoyed baking more." She nodded, her eyes narrowing, not at the paper, but at the man holding it, as if she were reading the spaces between his words. "Could be Emma," she said. "Emma. Girl who sells pies over on the east side of the market. Doesn't put her name on anything, doesn't take regulars. Leaves recipes in paper bags like people toss letters into a river. Light as that. And now, don't know. She comes and goes. Sometimes she bakes, then disappears. Shy thing." Daniel stood still. The name Emma sounded like a melody half remembered, not complex, not ornate. Just something that, when heard, made you feel like you should remember it. He looked down at the note in his hand. Small script, faint traces, and a story not yet told. Just a scrap of paper. But he knew he had stepped into something far, more real than any contract he'd ever signed, and he wouldn't leave. not until he found the one who had written it. The Vermont farmers' market felt different that morning, not because the air had changed or the stalls rearranged, but because Daniel, for the first time in a long while, wasn't walking with the intention to buy something. He was looking for someone he'd never met, didn't know by name, and yet somehow she had rewritten a quiet rhythm inside his heart. He made his way to the eastern corner of the market, the one the old woman had mentioned. Amid the vibrant chaos of color and voices, there was a wooden table, its surface stained with ink and softened with age. Behind it, a young woman packed pastries into brown paper bags. No sign, no sales pitch. Everything about the scene was still understated. She didn't look up as he approached. Her long brown hair was tied back simply, her beige coat slightly worn at the cuffs. Her movements were unhurried, deliberate, folding each bag like a letter sent out into the world, not expecting an answer. Daniel paused a few steps away, reluctant to interrupt. He glanced at the offerings, apple pies, cinnamon rolls, and small powdered cookies he couldn't quite name. Each bag had a folded note sealed with a strip of simple tape. He realized this was how she shared her recipes. "Excuse me," he said softly. "Are you Emma?" She looked up. Her eyes were a clear, quiet brown, deep, watchful. Not surprised, not guarded. Just a steady gaze, neither open nor shut. "Yes." Just one word. Short, like her, spare and full of things unsaid. Daniel stepped closer, pulling the note from his pocket. He held it out with both hands as if offering something fragile and precious. "This recipe, I found it in an old basket. I tried it, and I just wanted to say thank you." She looked at the paper, her brow knitting, not with confusion but recollection. Then she smiled barely, like the sound of a crust cracking in the oven. "Oh, I sometimes tuck those into baskets, like tossing letters into a river." "Letters into a river?" She nodded, her hands never stopping. "No reply needed. I just hope someone reads them." Daniel stood in silence. It had been a long time since anyone had spoken to him like that. Slowly, without angles, without the machinery of persuasion, a kind of conversation with no goal but to be honest, to be real. He picked up a bag of cinnamon rolls, opened the flap. "Read the note tucked inside. Cinnamon rolls don't have to be perfect, just warm enough to remind someone of a morning they once loved." He exhaled, not from any grand revelation, just because so many things inside him, buried under contracts and campaigns, had started to loosen, to drift. "Do you know," he said quietly, "you helped me bake the third pie again." She looked up, a question in her eyes. "The third one's always the best," he added, smiling. A smile flickered across her lips. Not wide, not certain, just a nod, enough to say she understood. Daniel bought a few more bags. He didn't ask for her number, didn't hand her a card. He simply said, "I'll come back, if you're still sending letters downriver." And when he turned to go, she bent her head again, folding another bag. Quiet. But in the one he carried, there was a different note, folded in two, inked in brown, the script slanted and familiar. If someone ever forgets why they began, maybe they should start again by baking. Emma left no name, only cinnamon in the air and a gentle rhythm in someone else's heart. Rain tapped gently on the wooden eaves, brushing against the yellowing maple leaves like a final stroke on a painting already complete. Early winter in Vermont no longer held the crisp clarity of a fall postcard, but instead carried the quiet grace of someone who had once been hurt and still found a way to smile. Daniel returned to the market 2 days later, not for the pastries, not for nostalgia, but with a decision. He had thought it through. There was something in the way Emma wrote those small notes, in her unassuming presence, in those imperfect pastries with their cracked edges and honest flavor, that made things clearer than anything had in years. If he was going to begin again, it could only be by beginning with her. She was there in her usual corner, at that same worn wooden table. Her eyes were lowered, folding paper bags as if folding steady breaths. When he approached, she looked Up. A flicker of surprise, but no confusion. You already finished the pastries? She asked, her voice still as soft as before. Not just finished them. I thought about them all night, he smiled. Emma, I have a proposition. It might be a little sudden. She tilted her head, waiting, without judgment. He went on. I want to start a new line of restaurants, not upscale, no cookie-cutter franchises. Just small, warm places where each dish is handwritten, like yours. No heavy PR, no Michelin stars, just food. That makes people remember something. Emma said nothing at first. Her hand rested on an open bag she hadn't yet sealed. A breeze lifted a strand of hair across her cheek. Would you be head chef for it? He asked, openly. The silence between them wasn't heavy, but it held the weight of the rain on the roof. No. The answer came gently, but clearly as Daniel paused, not from offense, but because he hadn't expected something so simple. He almost asked why, but stopped. There was something in her gaze, guarded but not cold, that told him if. She wanted to explain she would. Emma set the bag aside and motioned for him to sit. He did, and then she spoke, voice quiet, like she was unfolding a story she hadn't touched in a long time. Once, I gave a recipe to a bakery I worked at. No name on it, just a small idea, lemon filling with orange zest and a note that said, "Lemon bites like missing someone who's no longer there." She paused, eyes distant, not sad, but deep. They used the recipe, renamed it, cut the note, turned it into a bestseller, and when people called it professional, I realized it wasn't me anymore. Daniel said nothing. He just listened. Sometimes listening is the only way to really touch someone. She turned back to him. Her eyes were clear, not confident, but full of a light that belonged to someone who still believed in things, but needed the right to protect them. If I join, every recipe stays exactly as I wrote it. The handwriting, the tone, even the little notes that seem unnecessary. And no press, no photos, no interviews. Daniel smiled, a real one this time. Like someone who had found something far more valuable than capital, you'll have full say. And if just one person understands a dish, it's still worth serving. Emma nodded, not yes, not a handshake. Just a nod, the kind of nod that's enough to begin again. When Daniel walked away, the rain had stopped, not because the sky had cleared, but because something inside him had. In his coat pocket was another note, the scent of pastry still, clinging faintly to it. If a dish doesn't make someone remember something, then no matter how perfect it is, it's still a sad dish. The first shop opened on a morning shrouded in soft mist, with condensation still clinging to the window panes. The hand-carved wooden sign read only 2 words, Thu Bep, kitchen letters. No slogan, no logo, no owner's name. Just a place where people came to eat and to remember. In the small kitchen tucked behind the counter, Emma stood beside the oven, cotton gloves on her hands, her hair tied back as always. The scent of cinnamon and butter drifted through, the room mingling with the smell of damp wood and brown paper. Each pastry was wrapped by hand, one at a time, each with a folded note inside, sometimes a recipe, sometimes just a few scattered lines. Sometimes sweetness arrives last, when we've waited long enough. Not every day needs to be complete, just offer a spoonful of calm. This one's a little burnt on the edge. Maybe we are too, and still we go on. The customers came, steadily. Not in floods, but with intention. Word spread of a strange little bakery that didn't post curated photos, didn't live stream, didn't try to be famous. But those who came left changed, as if someone had quietly opened an old drawer in their heart. A week later, a video appeared. Online, the title read, "What's behind the handwritten bakery that's making a city cry?" The creator was a well-known food vlogger, famous for exploring healing spaces. In the video, she sat in the shop, reading a note that had come with her pastry. She took a bite and cried. The video went viral, thousands of shares. Emotional comments. The hashtag #TarThubep exploded. Then came the backlash. Speculation grew. Who's behind this? Why won't they show the baker's face? Could this be a covert campaign from some savvy marketing firm? Another video surfaced. Beautifully fake. Is ThuBep just a clever strategy? It dissected camera angles, fonts. On the notes, hypothesized about emotional engineering funded by a hidden company. Emma didn't use social media much, but a friend sent her a screenshot. The shop labeled suspicious anonymity. She went still when she saw it. Not out of anger, but fear. That evening in the kitchen, she paused mid-motion, the cinnamon held in her hand above a tray of pies. Daniel walked by, catching her frozen beside the oven, the scent not yet released. "What's wrong?" he asked. Emma was quiet for a moment. Then softly, "I think maybe I should stop." Daniel looked at her, not surprised but understanding. He had anticipated this moment, just not so soon. "I'm not afraid of people knowing the pastries," she went on. "I'm just afraid they'll come for a story someone invented, that no one will show up anymore just because they want to eat something written by hand." "So you think they come for the story?" Daniel asked gently. "I don't know," Emma whispered. "But if one day I'm told to write a recipe just viral enough, then it all breaks." Daniel didn't argue. He quietly pulled open a drawer and took out a sheet of paper, a copy of the first recipe Emma had ever written. He placed it on the table. The third pie, he said, still wasn't perfect, but it was enough to make someone who thought he'd never touch a kitchen again remember why he ever loved it. Emma lowered her head. After a long pause, she whispered, "I don't want my name known. I don't want my face to be a symbol. If we continue, I need to be invisible. I need to be the letter writer, not the person on stage." Daniel nodded. No promises, no declarations, just a silent agreement. So they stepped back. The official website for ThuBep was quietly revised. No About Us page. Each post featured only a photo of a pastry, a table corner, or a line of handwritten script. Emma kept baking, not to be seen, not to be famous, but to keep something intact, a quiet breath held steady in a world too loud. That afternoon, Vermont looked washed clean by the night's rain. The air was sharp and clear, dry leaves swept from the sidewalks. The front window of ThuBep reflected a pale sky, neither gloomy nor bright, much like the story unfolding. Between them now, directionless perhaps, but slowly softening. Emma was still working in the back kitchen, but she was no longer the same as in the early days. Her eyes moved with more caution, her hands slowed as she wrote each note. The short lines she used to pen with ease now carried the weight of having once been misunderstood. Something inside her, though not broken, had drawn inward, like petals folding against a strong wind. Daniel saw it. He didn't blame her. But he couldn't let this end like a letter discarded over a misread sentence. That morning, standing in the shop, he turned to the manager and said, "We're hosting a tasting." The manager blinked. "What kind of tasting?" "No." "Kind," Daniel smiled. "Just one rule, no one knows who made what. No talking, no names, just taste and the memories it brings." 2 days later, the event took place in a wooden room on the edge of the forest. No banners, no influencers, no press. Invitations were handwritten on folded cards that read, "Not everyone needs to know your name, but someone might remember you. By taste." The room glowed under soft golden lights. Rough wooden tables held 3 plates each. No labels, no menus, no descriptions. Guests were invited to sit quietly, taste each pastry, and write a single line about what it reminded them of. Emma didn't attend. Daniel didn't ask her to. But before he left the shop that morning, she left a basket by the door, inside a small apple pie and a note. "If someone remembers you, there's no need for a name." The tasting unfolded in a silence that was oddly beautiful. No cameras, clicking, no lively debate, just people and pastries, and the hush between slow bites. Someone wrote, "This tastes like the day my mother hugged me goodbye before I left for college." Another. "The second one brought back my dad's Old kitchen Sunday mornings, him humming while he baked. At the end, Daniel stood, no podium, no spotlight. He spoke quietly like he was telling something to himself. Someone asked me why I don't reveal the name of the person behind these pastries. Why keep it a secret? I used to think success meant building a brand. Getting the name out. He paused, looked into the stillness of the room. But then I realized, a name doesn't carry memory. Flavor does. No applause followed, only silence, the kind that lets something settle deep. That night, Daniel returned to the shop. Emma was washing trays, her hair falling loose around her face. She didn't ask anything. He placed a single piece of paper on the table, written by one of the tasters. Thank you to the one who never showed their face but made me remember I was once the happiest child with a warm slice of pie. Emma read it. Her hands stilled. She didn't smile. Didn't cry. Only her eyes shifted, less guarded now, like petals slowly opening again. The set was quiet. No grand studio lights, no glare forcing squints. Everything was arranged like an old reading room, a wooden bookshelf, a velvet armchair in moss green, a low vase of dried flowers in the background. And Daniel Hayes, once a face on the cover of finance magazines, now sat in a plain shirt, the watch his mother had given him still on his wrist, looking into the camera with a calm, open gaze. One last question, Mr. Hayes, the interviewer, smiled, her voice like the beginning of a story. Why did you decide not to reveal the identity of the creator behind Thu Bep's emotional recipe system? That's what everyone wants to know. Daniel looked down at the cup of tea, now cold. He wasn't thinking. He was remembering. Once, he said, I found a handwritten note in an old basket at the farmer's market. It was a recipe for apple pie. No name. Just one line at the end. Don't be afraid to season with feeling. The first time might go wrong, but the third pie is always the best. He looked up, the faintest smile in his eyes. That night, I baked. The first one burned. The second was bland, but the third, he paused, eyes drifting, as if the pie was still warm on a kitchen table somewhere deep in the Vermont woods. The third reminded me why I ever learned to cook. Not to open a restaurant chain, not to build an empire, but because I once saw my mother's eyes light up when she cut into a pie I'd baked, even though the crust was scorched. The interviewer said nothing. The camera crew didn't interrupt. The room held the hush of a note that had just begun to echo. Daniel continued, his voice softer now. That's why I never announced who wrote those recipes. Because sometimes, the most beautiful thing is not knowing who stirred a feeling inside you, just knowing that you felt it. The interview ended. But Daniel didn't go back to his office. Instead, he turned off the main road, back to the Vermont farmers market, not to look for anything, but to leave something behind. In the same corner where he'd once found the basket, now a new produce stand, a small space sat empty at the edge of the table. Daniel placed a wicker basket there, old but clean. Inside, a brown paper bag held a warm apple pie, carefully wrapped. Tucked inside was a handwritten note. The third time is always the best. No name, no logo. The next morning, Emma received the basket. She knew instantly, not from the handwriting or the paper, but from the scent. It was the same. As that night in the little kitchen, when Daniel told her about trying again, she sat on the steps outside her home, pie in hand, not eating it yet, just holding it. That feeling of being remembered without being named, of being trusted without needing to prove a thing. Maybe that's how those who heal others finally get healed in return. She opened the note again. The third time is always the best. And she smiled softly, like the last breath of winter folding closed, leaving behind the hush before spring. Thank you for walking this story with us. Not to remember a name, but to remember yourself. If a pastry ever made you pause, even once like this video, and if you believe like we do that every memory deserves to be told, subscribe, because some things are small, but reach deep.